They called it justice, but it was really just a blacklist, an industry purge that left no one safe. Behind every headline about Hollywood's Red Scare lies a story that's rarely told. The lives and careers swept away in silence. Who were the artists erased from history? And how did fear become the most powerful studio in town? Tonight, we're tracing the real casualties. Names you won't find on movie posters, but whose shadows still haunt the silver screen's brightest lights. Larry Parks. There was a time when Larry Parks was the golden boy of Columbia Pictures, riding high after his Oscar-nominated performance in The Jolson Story. Parks embodied the American dream, a Midwestern kid whose earnestness and talent propelled him to the top. But in the tense, shadowy years of the Hollywood blacklist, dreams turned into nightmares overnight. Parks was the first major actor to be dragged before the House Un-American Activities Committee, and the spectacle was brutal. Sitting under the blinding glare of television lights, Parks' voice trembled as he confessed to attending Communist Party meetings years earlier, back when political activism was the rage among artists fighting fascism during World War II. His admission wasn't enough. The committee wanted names, friends, colleagues, even acquaintances from Hollywood parties, and the pressure mounted until Parks, in a moment that would haunt him for the rest of his life, complied. In the public's eyes, he became a tragic symbol, too honest to lie, too broken to fight. Columbia dropped him instantly. Studios locked their doors. Offers vanished. Parks' wife, actress Betty Garrett, also saw her career stall. The humiliation wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Friends stopped calling. Former co-stars crossed the street to avoid him. For years, Parks wandered the fringes of show business, taking whatever stage roles or low-budget gigs he could find, while the public debated whether he was a victim or a villain. What Hollywood forgot is that the blacklist wasn't just about those who refused to testify. It destroyed anyone caught in its gears, even the ones who tried to cooperate. Larry Parks died young, never regaining his old stature, his legacy a reminder that in the Cold War era, even the brightest stars could be snuffed out in an instant. Howard Da Silva. Howard Da Silva's story is one that never quite gets the space it deserves in the official Hollywood histories. A case study in how talent could be erased with a single accusation. Da Silva was a mainstay of both stage and screen, memorable for his rugged face and booming presence in films like The Lost Weekend and The Blue Dahlia. By the late 1940s, he was one of the busiest character actors in the business. But the blacklist came for him with a silent, surgical precision. Named in red channels and called before HUAC, Da Silva refused to play the part of the informant. He stood his ground, insisting that his political beliefs, formed during the turbulent labor struggles of the 1930s, were his private business. Hollywood didn't care. The studios dropped him. Broadway closed its doors. Even radio and television, then booming with opportunity, wouldn't touch him. Da Silva found himself suddenly unemployable, a ghost haunting the city he once ruled. To survive, he went back to the stage, but even there, the shadow lingered. His casting in the original Broadway production of South Pacific was revoked after the FBI pressured the show's producers. Da Silva spent years in the cultural wilderness, taking work wherever he could find it. Yet, he never apologized, never broke. When the climate finally thawed, he returned to the screen, older, but just as formidable, earning a Tony nomination and appearing in films like 1776 and the TV series The Outer Limits. Da Silva's story is a testament to quiet resilience, but it also shows how many careers were needlessly interrupted, how easily the blacklist could erase even the most solid foundations. Anne Revere. Anne Revere was the kind of actress whose presence could elevate any film. Her performances in National Velvet, Gentleman's Agreement, and The Song of Bernadette brought a rare depth and moral weight to the mother roles she so often played. But off-screen, Revere was no one's idea of a docile matron. She was outspoken, fiercely principled, and unafraid to use her platform for political advocacy, particularly for labor rights and civil liberties. That courage came at a steep price. In the early 1950s, Revere, then at the height of her career, was called to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee. She refused to name names or betray her friends, standing firm even as studio heads and union officials leaned on her to cooperate. The punishment was swift and total. Revere's contract with MGM was terminated. Her name was published in red channels, the unofficial blacklist that spread fear through the entertainment industry. Work dried up overnight. For more than a decade, Revere's screen went dark. She survived by returning to her first love, Broadway, but Hollywood never forgave her defiance. The roles she played in later years were fewer and smaller, but her dignity remained intact. Revere never apologized for her beliefs or her silence before HUAC. She once said, "I'd rather starve than betray a friend." The industry moved on, but Anne Revere's story remains a powerful lesson in the cost of conscience, a reminder that for every big name ruined by the blacklist, there were dozens more whose courage was met only by silence and closed doors. John Garfield. John Garfield's life reads like a classic Hollywood tragedy. Born Jacob Garfinkel in New York's Lower East Side, Garfield's tough upbringing was etched into every role he played, a combination of street smarts, vulnerability, and restless energy that made him a star. By the 1940s, he was one of Warner Brothers' size brightest talents, turning in unforgettable performances in films like Body and Soul and The Postman Always Rings Twice. Off-screen, Garfield was equally uncompromising. He spoke out for labor unions, championed civil rights, and never shied away from controversy. It was this same integrity that would lead to his downfall during the blacklist era. When called before the House Un-American Activities Committee, Garfield refused to name names, standing on principle despite knowing the risks. His defiance marked him as a pariah. Studio offers dried up. Scripts stopped coming. Rumors swirled in the gossip columns, painting him as a secret subversive. The pressure was unrelenting, not just from Washington, but from the very industry he helped build. Garfield's health began to suffer under the strain. Friends noticed the weight he carried, the insomnia and mounting anxiety. At just 39 years old, Garfield died of a heart attack, but many close to him believed it was the blacklist, not genetics, that truly broke him. Hollywood quickly moved on, but those who remembered Garfield knew he represented the best and worst of his era. A talented artist destroyed not by scandal or vice, but by his refusal to betray his conscience. In the years that followed, his legacy was quietly reclaimed by film lovers and historians, who saw in Garfield not only a brilliant performer, but a casualty of Hollywood's darkest chapter. Gail Sergard. Gail Sergard's face was once a familiar sight to audiences in the 1930s and 40s. She became the first woman to win the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, snagging the inaugural Oscar for her role in Anthony Adverse. With her striking looks and mysterious presence, Sergard found steady work in major studio pictures, playing everything from sinister villains to complex character roles. But like so many others, her flourishing career was derailed by political suspicion. It wasn't just Gail who drew scrutiny. Her husband, screenwriter Herbert Bberman, was one of the Hollywood 10. Their home was watched. Their friends became wary. When Bberman was subpoenaed and refused to testify, the crosshairs shifted onto Sergard herself. Refusing to denounce her husband or disavow her own left-leaning politics, she was swept onto the blacklist almost overnight. Projects evaporated. She was dropped from the cast of The Letter, a role that went to Bette Davis and cemented Davis's legend. Even Sergard's Oscar could not shield her. Her name was quietly erased from studio ledgers. For years, she and Bberman survived on the fringes, working in theater and struggling to get by, as friends and colleagues distanced themselves. Sergard never regained her earlier stardom, but she never apologized for standing by her beliefs or her husband. When the blacklist finally faded, she returned in a handful of character roles, but the loss was permanent. Hollywood had moved on. Sondergaard's story is a testament to the personal costs of the era. It wasn't only the public figures who paid the price, but the families, the marriages, and the quiet acts of loyalty that were never forgiven by the industry. Dorothy Comingore. Dorothy Comingore was the woman who played Susan Alexander Kane, the tragic centerpiece of Citizen Kane, a performance still studied for its vulnerability and realism. Yet, as soon as the spotlight faded, so did Comingore's Hollywood prospects, and the reason had little to do with her talent. In the early 1940s, Comingore was outspoken in her support for progressive causes, openly campaigning for labor rights and lending her name to civil rights efforts. This made her a target when the blacklist swept through Hollywood. Her phone was tapped. FBI agents tailed her. Gossip columnists whispered about her supposed communist ties. She was subpoenaed to testify before HUAC, and though she denied being a party member, the stain of suspicion was enough. Studio offers vanished. Her marriage collapsed under the strain. Even her children's custody was called into question because of her subversive reputation. Comingore's life quickly unraveled. The industry that once courted her now closed its doors, with even her most loyal friends too afraid to be seen in public with her. By the 1950s, Comingore was reduced to odd jobs and minor stage work, a far cry from the acclaim she once enjoyed. Her health deteriorated, and she struggled with addiction and depression, dying at just 58 years old. Decades later, film historians have worked to restore Comingore's reputation, recognizing her as another casualty of Hollywood's climate of fear. Today, her brief, brilliant career is a reminder that in the golden age, being talented and outspoken could become a dangerous combination. Lionel Stander. Lionel Stander was a force to be reckoned with on both stage and screen, his gravelly voice and brash demeanor making him an unforgettable presence in films like A Star is Born and Mr. Deeds Goes to Town. Yet, for all his talent, Stander was never content to simply act. He was an outspoken champion of workers' rights and an unrelenting union activist. His fiery rhetoric and refusal to play ball with studio heads earned him as many enemies as fans. When the blacklist era dawned, Stander's name was among the first to be whispered in Hollywood's back rooms. He was called before HUAC and, true to form, refused to cower. Instead, he delivered a scathing rebuke, denouncing the committee's tactics and calling the hearings a witch hunt. His resistance was headline news, but it came at a steep price. Stander was blacklisted from both films and radio, offers dried up, and his phone stopped ringing. He was fired from several projects mid-production, sometimes without even being told the reason. For years, he scraped by with odd jobs, performing in dinner theater, and even working as a laborer. Stander's reputation as difficult made his exile almost total, but he never lost his sense of humor or his fighting spirit. Only in the 1960s did the climate begin to shift, and Stander gradually found his way back into the industry. He later enjoyed a career revival with his role as Max on the popular TV series Heart to Heart, introducing his talent to a new generation. But the scars of the blacklist never fully healed. Stander's story is a vivid example of how Hollywood punished not just beliefs, but any form of resistance, and how surviving it often meant starting all over again. Marsha Hunt. Marsha Hunt was poised for a long, glittering career in Hollywood. Discovered at 17, she quickly became a staple of MGM's golden era, appearing in over 50 films by her mid-20s and working alongside stars like Laurence Olivier and John Wayne. But Hunt was more than a contract player. She was compassionate, highly intelligent, and socially conscious. During World War II, she became involved in humanitarian work, and after the war, she continued to advocate for progressive causes, campaigning against nuclear weapons, supporting world hunger relief, and, crucially, joining the Committee for the First Amendment to protest the HUAC hearings. That decision changed everything. Hunt's name appeared in red channels, the infamous pamphlet used by studios and networks to identify suspected subversives. Almost overnight, film offers dried up. Directors who once courted her now avoided her entirely. For more than a decade, Hunt found herself relegated to sporadic television appearances and regional theater, a humiliating step down for someone once touted as the next great leading lady. Hunt never denied her activism. Instead, she spoke openly about her blacklisting, becoming a passionate chronicler of the period and a mentor to younger actors. Her later years were marked by advocacy and reflection, as she fought to ensure that the pain and injustice of the Blacklist era were never forgotten. Today, Hunt is remembered not only for her luminous screen presence, but for her courage in an age when silence was safer, and for her insistence that history should never be allowed to repeat itself. Sam Womaker. Sam Wanamaker's Hollywood story is one of forced reinvention and unexpected triumphs. As a young actor in post-war America, Wanamaker seemed poised for a major film career. He had already earned critical praise on stage and screen when, in the late 1940s, his name surfaced among suspected leftists. When he traveled to England for a theater project, word reached him that he was about to be called before HUAC. Wanamaker made a fateful choice. Rather than return and face the committee, risking blacklisting, jail, or worse, he stayed in the UK. Hollywood slammed the door behind him. Wanamaker was blacklisted in absentia. Work in the States was impossible. Starting over wasn't easy, but Wanamaker's talent and resilience paid off. He rebuilt his career on British stages, eventually becoming one of the most respected actor-directors in the UK. He also became a visionary cultural leader, dedicating years to the campaign to reconstruct Shakespeare's Globe Theatre on London's South Bank, a project that would become his enduring legacy. Wanamaker returned to American screens only after the Blacklist era faded, but he never again found the opportunities that had once seemed within reach. His life is a striking example of how political fear not only stunted careers, but scattered some of Hollywood's brightest talents across the globe, forcing them to find new ways to create and contribute far from home. Jeeel Dasan. Jeeel Dasan's directorial career was one of the great what-ifs of Hollywood's golden age. In the 1940s, Dasan established himself as one of the sharpest new voices in American cinema, renowned for taut crime dramas like Brute Force and The Naked City. But Dasan's career in Hollywood was cut short just as he was poised to reach new heights. Like many artists of his generation, Dasan's early political involvement, joining the Communist Party during the Great Depression, would come back to haunt him in the late 1940s. As the Blacklist closed in, Dasan sensed trouble. While in London working on a film, he learned he'd been named in the United States as a suspected subversive. Fearing arrest or public humiliation, he stayed abroad, exiled from the industry that had given him his start. The Blacklist meant total professional and social isolation. Studios back home cut all ties, and his Hollywood credits abruptly ended. But exile didn't silence Dasan's creative drive. Instead, it led to reinvention. He settled in France and, despite the pain of being banished, directed some of his most iconic films overseas, including the celebrated heist masterpiece Rififi, and later, Never on Sunday. Dasan's style evolved, shaped by the European sensibility and the freedom he found outside the Hollywood system. Yet the wounds lingered. He spoke often of the humiliation and loneliness caused by the Blacklist, and how the pain of being rejected by his home country never fully healed. Though he found acclaim abroad, Hollywood remained closed to him for decades. Dasan's story is a powerful reminder of how the Blacklist didn't just end careers. It forced artists to seek new identities, sometimes at the cost of everything they'd built. Herbert Bberman. Herbert Bberman's name is forever linked with the most notorious chapter in Blacklist history. The making of Salt of the Earth. As a playwright, screenwriter, and director, Bberman's career was already marked by both achievement and controversy when he was called before HUAC in 1947 as one of the Hollywood 10. Refusing to answer questions about his political beliefs or to name names, Bberman was convicted of contempt of Congress and sent to prison for 6 months. When he was released, he found himself locked out of Hollywood. No studio would touch him, and most former friends had disappeared. Yet, Bberman's response was not silence, but defiance. In 1954, he teamed up with other blacklisted artists and Mexican-American miners to create Salt of the Earth, a film that dramatized a real-life labor strike and featured a mostly non-professional cast. Shot on a shoestring budget and under constant threat of sabotage, actors were threatened, equipment was destroyed, and even the FBI-monitored production, Salt of the Earth, became a rallying cry for artistic freedom. For his efforts, Bberman was further ostracized. The film was banned from most theaters and publicly denounced as communist propaganda. Bberman never again worked for a major studio. His creative output reduced to a handful of small projects and advocacy for other blacklisted artists. Yet his courage in making Salt of the Earth has only grown in legend, a symbol of resistance against censorship and the price of principle. Today, Bberman's legacy stands as a testament to creative resilience in the face of institutional injustice. Edward Dmitri. Edward Dmitri was one of Hollywood's rising directorial talents in the 1940s, carving out a reputation for taut, suspenseful films like Murder, My Sweet, and Crossfire. As a child of Russian immigrants and a self-made man, Dmitri's perspective was shaped by the struggles of the working class. That perspective led him to join the Communist Party during the Depression, a decision that seemed almost routine among Hollywood's left-leaning artists. But when the Blacklist descended, Dmitri's membership became a weapon used against him. He was called before HUAC as one of the infamous Hollywood 10, filmmakers and writers who refused to testify and were sent to prison for contempt of Congress. Dmitri served time, but the price for defiance was higher than he expected. After his release, facing financial ruin and fearing for his family's safety, Dmitri made the painful decision to return to the committee and testify, naming former colleagues in an effort to rebuild his career. This act made him a pariah among many in the creative community, even as it allowed him to work again. Dmitri's films post-Blacklist were respected, but never recaptured the acclaim of his earlier work. His personal life was scarred by guilt and regret. He became a cautionary tale about the impossible choices forced upon those swept up by the Blacklist. Damned if you complied, doomed if you resisted. Edward Dmitri's journey through Hollywood's golden era is a complex, unsettling portrait of survival and the moral gray zones that define history's darkest chapters. Jeff Corey. To most audiences, Jeff Corey was a face, one of those character actors who seemed to pop up everywhere in the golden age of Hollywood, playing everything from tough guys to wise old men. But to generations of actors, Corey was much more, a master teacher whose classes became legendary. Corey's road to the Blacklist began in the 1930s, when he was drawn to political activism and union organizing at a time when Hollywood was a hotbed of radical thought. During World War II, he joined the Army and served honorably, returning to a busy film and television career. But the climate had changed by the late 1940s. When Corey was called before HUAC, he refused to name names or betray his friends, insisting that his political associations were nobody's business but his own. The price for this integrity was instant and total blacklisting. For a decade, Corey could not find work in film, radio, or TV. With a family to support, he turned to teaching, building a small acting studio in Los Angeles. Ironically, his forced exile created a legacy of its own. Corey's students included James Dean, Jane Fonda, and Jack Nicholson, actors who would go on to define a new era in Hollywood. When The Blacklist finally lost its power, Corey returned to the screen, his skills undiminished, his reputation for quiet courage intact. His story is a testament to the ways people adapt under pressure, and how even in the darkest periods, creativity and mentorship can flourish in unexpected places. Willge Gear. Willge Gear is best remembered today as the beloved Grandpa Walton from the Waltons. But before he found redemption on television, Gear endured years of forced exile from Hollywood due to The Blacklist. Gear was a larger-than-life character, an actor, singer, and passionate social activist who lent his booming voice to labor rallies and progressive causes throughout the 1930s and 1940s. His leftist sympathies and refusal to hide his beliefs made him a prime target as anti-communist sentiment swept through the industry. In 1951, after being subpoenaed by HUAC, Gear declined to answer questions about his political affiliations or those of his friends. The result was swift and brutal. Contracts canceled, his name scrubbed from cast lists, and his opportunities in film and television instantly gone. With 3 children to support, Gear and his wife, fellow blacklisted actress Herta Ware, packed up and left Hollywood behind. In rural California, they founded the Theatricum Botanicum, an open-air theater and artist colony that became a haven for other blacklisted performers and writers. Through years of hardship, Gear never lost his sense of humor or his resolve. He found work in folk music, storytelling, and live performance, surviving on the fringes of the industry he once helped build. Only in the 1970s, decades after The Blacklist's worst years, did Hollywood offer a second chance, and Gear's late career success on The Waltons introduced him to a new generation. Yet, the scars remained, a reminder that political fear could drive even the most talented to the margins, and that redemption, when it came, was always bittersweet. Willge Gear's story stands as a testament to the endurance of both art and conviction in the face of crushing adversity. Lester Cole. Lester Cole's life and career were defined by both creative brilliance and defiant resistance. As a founding member of the Screenwriters Guild and a respected screenwriter behind classics like Blood on the Sun and Objective, Burma, Cole was a prominent voice in Hollywood's community of artists and activists. His political convictions, rooted in a lifelong belief in social justice and equality, made him an obvious target when the industry turned on its own. Called before HUAC as one of the Hollywood 10, Cole refused to answer questions about his past or betray his friends and colleagues. He was cited for contempt, served time in federal prison, and was formally blacklisted from every major studio. For more than a decade, Cole was forced to write under pseudonyms, his name erased from the films he helped create. Despite the economic hardship and emotional toll, he never recanted his beliefs or expressed regret for his defiance. In exile, Cole continued to write, teach, and organize, becoming an inspiration to younger generations of writers and activists. Only in the 1960s did he see his name restored to a handful of credits. But by then, the golden age that shaped him had long since passed. Cole's story is emblematic of a generation whose talents and ideals were sacrificed to political fear. His enduring legacy is not only the films he wrote, but the courage he showed in standing up to one of Hollywood's darkest and most repressive chapters. For every famous name blacklisted, there were countless others whose stories vanished into Hollywood's shadows. Careers shattered, families uprooted, and legacies erased, not by talent or scandal, but by fear and suspicion. The Blacklist era reminds us how easily justice can falter when the powerful dictate who belongs and who disappears. Even today, the echoes remain. As we revisit these forgotten victims, their courage in the face of silence demands we remember and refuse to let history bury them again. Adrien Scott. Adrien Scott was one of the most talented and influential screenwriters and producers of the 1940s, a key architect behind hard-hitting film noirs like Murder, My Sweet, and Crossfire. Scott's rise was swift, propelled by a sharp mind, a gift for dialogue, and a commitment to stories about social injustice. But in post-war Hollywood, Scott's leftist politics would become his undoing. As a member of the Communist Party and a passionate union advocate, he quickly drew the ire of those determined to root out subversive elements from the film industry. In 1947, Scott was summoned before HUAC as part of the Hollywood 10. Refusing to name names or recant his beliefs, he was convicted of contempt of Congress and served nearly a year in prison. By the time he was released, his name had become radioactive. Studios blacklisted him. Producers wouldn't take his calls. Even friends and former collaborators kept their distance, afraid of guilt by association. Scott's creative voice was silenced just as he was hitting his stride. To survive, he moved to England with his wife, actress Anne Shirley, and wrote under pseudonyms, his scripts circulating in secret among sympathetic colleagues. It would take nearly 2 decades for Scott to see his name restored to the credits of a Hollywood film. But the momentum was lost. The stories he wanted to tell no longer matched the industry's appetite, and the personal cost of exile was enormous. Adrien Scott's career stands as a stark reminder that the blacklist didn't just end jobs. It erased artistic legacies and drove some of the era's brightest talents out of the country and into obscurity. For every famous name blacklisted, there were countless others whose stories vanished into Hollywood's shadows. Careers shattered, families uprooted, and legacies erased, not by talent or scandal, but by fear and suspicion. The blacklist era reminds us how easily justice can falter when the powerful dictate who belongs and who disappears. Even today, the echoes remain. As we revisit these forgotten victims, their courage in the face of silence demands we remember and refuse to let history bury them again.